Good morning, everybody. This is the third day, Friday morning, on the Enter conference, Enter 21 at your place, and a warm welcome from my side to the last day of Enter. Normally, the Friday morning is not the best morning to speak because when we are in a destination, we have the gala dinner at Thursday evening, and everybody is really tired. But I think we are all fresh this morning, and I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker for you all. And this is Sara Dolnicar, here next to me now. Welcome, Sara.
Hi.
Hi, in Berlin, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, and in Queensland, where you are?
It's 8 p.m. It's way too late for an old lady like me.
But great that you are here, Sara. Thank you very much. I would quickly introduce Sara. She is a professor at professor of tourism at the University of Queensland. She has a particular interest in empirical measurement and the social science, and has applied her work preliminary to tourism, but has also contributed to the areas of environmental volunteering, foster care, and public acceptance of water alternatives. Her current research program focuses on developing and experimentally testing measures that trigger pro-environmental behavior in tourists. In recognition of her achievement, Professor Dolnicar was elected a Fellow of Academy for Social Science in Australia, ASSA. The International Academy for Study of Tourism, the International Association of Scientific Experts in Tourism, IAST, and the Council for Australian Tourism and Hospitality Education, CORD. Since 2019, she has been awarded a prestigious Australian Research Council Laureate Fellowship to leave a creative and human legacy relating to her work into low-harm hedonism. Professor Dolnicar currently serves as a co-editor in Chief of Analysis of Tourism Research. Thank you for being here, Sara. It's really interesting. We had a lot of topics the last days about how can we make people behave more sustainable. And there was one thing yesterday with artificial intelligence, how we can inform people in a different way. So I'm very happy that you share your insights with us now.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the flattering introduction. So really what I will talk about today is part of that research program you mentioned in the introduction, which is about low-harm hedonism. So it's about human behavior in hedonic, enjoyment-focused contexts. And our aim is to try to get them to behave more environmentally friendly. And immediately you can see that's quite a tricky situation, right? Because it's not the kind of environment where we like to behave naturally, very environmentally friendly. So I will talk to you today about specifically the context of hotel operations and how maybe we can make tourists behave a little bit more environmentally friendly. The title does say leveraging technology, but I will tell you I'm not a technology expert. However, I do increasingly am befriending technology because it has a really important role to play, both in triggering behaviors and in measuring behaviors. So as we talk through the slides, I will make little side comments which are technology related, and I'd be happy to have take questions and have conversations about that aspect at the end of the talk. All right, let's have a look. First of all, just to put it all in perspective, it's really important to put it in perspective. What you all know is that tourism is a huge contributor to GDP and a huge contributor to jobs. Maybe not during COVID-19, but in normal circumstances, that's certainly the case. At the same time, it is also hugely environmentally unfriendly. So tourism is the 5th most polluting industry. It generates 8% of global CO2 emissions. It contributes up to 50.5% to global warming, And every year we generate 15 million tons of solid waste. One single person to cater for them one night, 300 liters. Now that doesn't mean that they're showering obsessively, right? But if you think about a hotel has gardens and pools and does laundry and all these kind of things. So to cater for one guest per night, 300 liters, huge amount of fresh water to cater for a guest. So then we sit back and we ask ourselves, who can fix this? And intuitively, we all say it's the government's responsibility, right? But of course, that's not so easy because governments want to earn the money and they also don't want to fight the tourism industry. So it's very hard to get lawmakers to say, prohibit room cleaning in hotels or prohibit any kind of plastic straws. Well, we're making some progress here, but that's difficult, right? So for us as researchers, that's not really a good avenue to try to make an impact and make a difference. So naturally, the second thing we say is well, industry has to self-regulate. And again, that's very, very difficult for us as researchers because industry ultimately needs to earn money and industry needs to satisfy the needs of tourists. And that's often a bit of a tension between the environmental sustainability and satisfying best possibly the needs of tourists. So again, for us as a research group, that wasn't the primary target we wanted to pursue. So we went and targeted the poor old tourist. We said, what can we do to trigger? Now, I like to say trick people to behave more environmentally friendly, but my Australian colleagues think that that's a bit rude. So maybe entice is a better word. Now, how can we entice tourists to behave more environmentally friendly? There's really there's many approaches, but in principle, I would like to propose that there's two. One we do all the time, and that's convincing them. All the time when we travel, we will find signs that tell us, please reuse your towel for the environment. Please don't have your linen changed for the environment, and so on and so on. Now, all of the research we've done shows, now I'm not saying it never works, right? But the research we've done indicates that there is very, very little effect of these kind of interventions. And the reason I would argue that's the case is because we are in a highly hedonic space. All we want is enjoyment and fun, right? So the last thing on our mind is to sit down and rationally think about the environmental impact of our actions and then decide, yes, I'm going to be a good girl and I'm going to change my behavior. So an alternative approach is something you've all heard about, and it's called nudging. So enticing people, tricking them, but without taking liberty away from them. Now, the classic example, which you're probably also familiar with, is from Amsterdam Airport, where the cleaning unit was very disappointed with the cleanliness in the boys' toilet. Everything was dirty all the time because there was some precision issues with the targeting, all right? So they had a brilliant idea. They said, how about we draw a little fly in the urinal? And guess what? No more cleaning problems. No more targeting problems. Clearly, something changed in the infrastructure that made it a lot of fun to target very precisely onto the fly. So it's a fun example, but it's also just a brilliant example of how you can make a tiny, tiny little change. And you're not preaching to people, you're not manipulating them, you're not taking their freedom away. They can still do whatever they want, but you are directing their behavior in a way that you would like to see them behave. So that's really the avenue that we were quite fascinated with and that we wanted to see and investigate whether we could leverage it in the sustainability space, specifically in tourism. So can we do that? Yes, we can. What I'll talk to you about now is not all my research. It's a bit of a mix of a number of studies, which I find, well, there's some of ours and some I just find really inspiring that other people conducted over the years, all trying to achieve the same thing with similar mechanisms. So one thing we can do is we can make tourists waive their room clean. Now, just to put this in perspective, a standard hotel still cleans a hotel room every single day. And every single day they clean the room, takes 35 liters of water, 100 milliliters of cleaning materials, and 1.5 kilowatt hours of electricity. So very environmentally unfriendly. And most of the time, unnecessary, right? We don't really need it vacuum cleaned. We don't need a full clean every day. So what can we do? We can do something very simple. We can buy them a drink. Now you're going to say, well, there's nothing new about it. And you're right. There is indeed nothing new. A lot of hotels do that. But still, we don't know what the effect is, and we don't understand the mechanisms, why it does or it does not work. So what we did in a Slovenian hotel is we first started with the baseline. You can see that here. The baseline is that the room is cleaned every single day, except if you put a sign out and the sign says, please do not clean my room. Now, you could guess. If we could interact, I would make you guess, but we can't. I will just tell you 3% of people, so practically nobody, waives a room clean if this model is implemented. So what we do then is we say, we'll buy you a drink, but we do it a bit differently. We leverage the understanding that people are quite skeptical about requests for environmental action. So we say openly to them, every time you waive a room clean, the hotel saves, let's say, $10. And what we're going to do is we're going to go halves. So the hotel is going to save $5, and the other $5 we will return to you in the form of a drinks voucher. So with that particular initiative launched in the hotel, we managed to reduce room cleaning by 42%. So we almost half room cleaning voluntarily. And the most important thing in all of what we do in tourism is we can never, ever, ever undermine guest satisfaction, right? So this particular intervention absolutely does not decrease guest satisfaction. On the contrary, the guests absolutely loved it. There was a huge black market. People were trading vouchers. So it was actually a big hit. And I would argue it increased holiday enjoyment rather than detracting or deducting from it, if you want. All right, and then, of course, we were curious because if it's true that environmental concern matters and that it's worth preaching to people about the environmental consequences, then we should be able to achieve an effect if we add to our drinks condition also a condition where we talk to people about the environment. So we did that. We now had they had to put a sign out saying, don't clean my room. If they did that, they get a drinks voucher. And the argument around why the initiative is being implemented is about sustainability. And guess what? Absolutely no additional effect above and beyond the drinks voucher and sharing of cost conditions. So we can make tourists waive their room cleans by sharing with them, not by preaching. Much more effective to have an intervention like the drinks voucher than to have a poster that says, please do something for your grandchildren and the planet. Now there's even a much easier way. Oh, sorry, now we have to talk about technology. Well, here, the way we did it is very old-fashioned, right? We used little vouchers that we were sliding under the hotel room door, and we had a plastic or paper sign that we hung out. So you can immediately see how you could do this with technology in a much more elegant manner. I obviously couldn't, but certainly it could be done without all this manual producing of vouchers. So an open area here for investigation. Now, even more effective, if you want to stop room cleaning, is to change the default. Yeah, classic nudging theory. Again, we did the experiment in a hotel in Slovenia, and this is a different hotel though. So the previous hotel was quite a nice hotel, mainly leisure tourism. This was a 3-star hotel, mainly for business tourists in the city environment. So quite a different setup. And what we did was, as I say, cheaper, simpler than the previous experiment. We just swapped the default. Originally, people had to put the sign out if they did not want the room cleaned. And we now said, we changed the model. By default, we are not cleaning your room every day. But if you would like it cleaned, we are very happy to do so, and we will do it at no extra cost. All you need to do is put the sign out that tells us that you would like to have your room cleaned. You see, there's no money involved, no drinks vouchers involved, no preaching involved, no nothing, and we reduce room cleaning by 63%, and guest satisfaction is not affected. So you can imagine that was a hotel that immediately adopted that intervention and immediately changed the default to no cleaning and cleaning only upon request. Technology, well, not obvious, but again, maybe the signaling of whether you do or do not want the room cleaned could be more sophisticated than the usual sign hanging on the door. All right, recycled serviettes. Now that's interesting. That was a topic that came out of a debrief. So we did this survey with the drinks vouchers, and we debriefed with the staff in the hotel. And as we were debriefing, the food and beverage manager said, oh, the serviettes, I'm so upset about the serviettes. And we had no idea what's the problem with the serviettes. But it turns out, we then calculated it, that those beautiful thick cotton serviettes hotels use are a lot more environmentally unfriendly than single-use recycled paper serviettes, about 3 times as bad, in fact. So the question then is, can we change in a relatively nice hotel, can we change over from having these really fancy thick cotton serviettes to recycled paper serviettes? So we ran another experiment, very simple. We knew that in the normal environment, every serviette is used by default, right? So we knew how many cotton serviettes we used. And then we changed it over. So we put recycled paper serviettes on the table. But remember, nudging, we don't want to take freedom away. So the cotton serviettes were at the buffet. And people were told that if they would like to have a cotton serviette, they're most welcome to go to the buffet and get a cotton serviette. What I will also say is we had to put a table sign on, which makes the experiment a little bit less elegant if you want, because the director of the hotel was very concerned. It's a high-end hotel, and the perception of cheap recycled serviettes wasn't something the director was very keen on. So what we did is we had a little table sign, and the table sign explained the environmental benefits. So it's a little bit muddled up between change in default and environmental explanation. Either way, the change in default with the environmental explanation reduced, well, basically changed it over, right? So we basically had almost 100% changeover from the cotton serviette to the recycled serviette. And surprise, surprise, high-end hotel, very fancy food, and yet no impact on guest satisfaction from the change in serviette. In fact, what the guests reported was that they were quite fascinated by the information because, like us, they were surprised that the recycled paper serviette was more environmentally friendly than the cotton serviette. All right, technology. Well, we didn't use any technology in the experiment, but you could certainly see again how you could have much more elegant implementations, right? Through the hotel, you could have signaling when people, for example, walk into the dining room. So instead of fiddling around with table signs, people could come into the dining room and a notification comes to their phone that explains why we're using serviettes, and that explains to them how they can get a cotton serviette if they want one. So really, I thought about this as I prepared the keynote for this conference, but it made me realize how much more elegant all of our experiments could have been implemented. All right, here's a study we did not conduct, but it's absolutely super cool, and it's about reducing shower time. So a big problem in hotels is that people go and shower, and they shower forever. One of our hotels in Brisbane told me that it's not uncommon for the fire alarm to go off because they shower so long that all the hot steam sets the fire alarm off. So that's bad, right? It uses a lot of water, but it also uses a lot of electricity or whatever energy is used to heat the water. So here's a very cool study that was conducted in hotels, and they provided instant feedback on how much people use in the shower. So they're in the shower and they have a monitor, not a computer monitor. It's just a tiny little display that shows the people, the tourists, as they're in the shower, how many liters are kind of running through the pipes for their enjoyment. And only feedback, no messaging, reduced. In this case, it wasn't the water they were measuring, it was the electricity. It was the hot water system that was the focus of the study by 11%. So you see, very, very simple. And here, and again, no impact on satisfaction. And here you see immediately the technology, right? That's just amazing. Just the technology to have that instant measurement of water flow. Many of these devices don't even require retro-engineering piping. It's all just the sound of the water that's enough to measure that. And then just the instant feedback. So here it's really a technology-driven intervention with an absolutely fantastic outcome. Really simple to implement. Everyone wins. Really no huge disadvantages from such an intervention. Now, food waste. That's been a bit of a pet topic for me recently. And it's become a pet topic because not only is food waste really a gigantic environmental problem, But to me, it's also fascinating that it's one of the areas where we can actually make a change without at all requiring sacrifice. Because if you think you go to a breakfast buffet or you go to a dinner buffet, it's all you can eat, right? So the enjoyment comes from tasting different things. And the enjoyment comes from not being hungry. And the enjoyment comes from walking around and browsing what's at the buffet. The enjoyment doesn't come from not eating up what's on your plate, right? So leaving plate behind, which has dramatic environmental consequences, is really not necessary for the tourists or the patrons' enjoyment of that particular meal experience. So I've been really quite fascinated. We've done quite a bit of work. A lot of them failed, by the way. That's important to say too, because I'm only telling you the successful experiments. Behind each successful one, there's a lot of unsuccessful ones, and we've had quite a few of those as well. So how can we make them eat up at buffets? Well, another all-time favorite of mine, I did not conduct this study, just so nobody misunderstands, but it's one of my all-time favorite studies because it's so very simple. So what they did is they reduced the plate size. Nothing else, no preaching, no nothing. It was done across 52 hotels of the same hotel chain. And the reduction was 3 centimeters in diameter of the plate. And the reduction in food leftovers of uneaten food on the plate was 20%. Now that is a massive impact. I have no calculations here for you now. But if you think about all the food that is not being purchased and not being prepared, and all the food disposal waste costs the hotel is not paying, those are real substantial savings for the hotel and real substantial savings for the environment. And again, no impact on guest satisfaction. Now, of course, you can't make them tiny, right? So it must be a reasonable size, but certainly you will go to hotels nowadays and you will find at buffets plates the size of salad bowls, right? And then you observe, which we also did. We did observation studies in buffet rooms, and it's remarkable. People just fill the plate, no matter how big the plate is. They just manage to fill it up, right? So this is a very, very simple infrastructure intervention that can help us reduce plate waste. Now, technology. Well, here there is no technology involved at all. But you will see in another one where we do plate waste, we've been thinking a lot about plates and technology. I'll tell you that. I have no solution, but if anyone is so inspired, we are dreaming of a way how we could monitor the plate waste and the plate waste composition with a little camera as the waiter brings the food into the kitchen, right? Just automatically scan it and figure out how much and what kind, because the type of food left behind also affects the environmental impact quite substantially. So endless potential for people who are experts in technology. Now, the same group of researchers in the same 52 hotels had an even simpler intervention and cheaper intervention. They put a table sign on the table. And the table sign said, "You're welcome back again and again. Visit our buffet many times. That's much better than taking a lot at once." Now, what they're achieving here is, if you do qualitative research with people in all-you-can-eat settings, they're embarrassed to go back, right? Because other people are watching them and they're looking greedy. So that's certainly not something people want to be perceived as. So the social norm tells them, I'll just go once and overfill the plate because that's less embarrassing. But what they do with the table sign, they actually turn that around and they change the social norm. They say to people, no, actually, it's not cool to overfill your plate. It's much cooler to just go multiple times and every time you take a little bit. And again, in fact, even better effect here, but probably insignificantly different, but 22% reduction in plate waste just as a consequence of that little table sign on the table. No effect on guest satisfaction again. Again, technology, well, here, no technology at all, but again, you can see the potential, right? So you could use the phone again for the messaging instead of relying on a table sign. And again, on the measurement side, there would be a huge role for technology in experiments like this one. All right, now, this is our study, isn't it? Yes, so Of the many studies we did, this one was successful. And it was not only successful, it was a huge amount of fun, and it was very, very rewarding. And what we did is we targeted specifically families with children. Why did we target families with children? Because we did an observation study initially where we measured plate waste, and we had the guest data of the hotel, and we had the plate waste for a long period of time. So we were basically able to calculate, just using a regression analysis, which aspects of the guest mix were associated with higher or with lower plate waste. And families are an absolute disaster, right? So families of all market segments, families create by far the most plate waste. So for us, that was interesting information, because we said, fantastic, well then that's obviously where we want to start. If we can make an impact with families, we have the potential to make a really big impact. So we did something really, really simple. Every one of you who has kids knows that kids will do anything for stickers and stamps. And so that's what we do. And all the technology experts will be amused, because this is so unsophisticated, it's almost embarrassing. So this is our big, great intervention. So it's an A4 piece of paper, which we kind of fold, and it becomes a stamp collection booklet. And so it was conducted at the dinner buffet. Every day at dinner, when the family ate up all the food, the whole food. So it was not on the individual level, it was the family level. So when the family ate all the plates, all the food on all the plates, the waiter gave them a stamp. And if they had all stamps for every single day of their holiday, then at the end of the stay, they were able to get a little reward. They gave the stamp collection to reception, and then they got a little prize. The prize was tiny. I forgot what it was, but it was hardly worth mentioning. But the amount of fun these kids had was absolutely unbelievable. So as a consequence of this little stamp collection game, we reduced plate waste among families by 38%. And it was just a pleasure to watch them. The kids absolutely loved it. And because it happened in Central Europe, at least that's what I think, because that's where I come from, it really worked very much in line with the parental messaging. So what we observed in the dining room was the kids being keen to get the stamp, and the parents and the grandparents encouraging, right? Because that's exactly what they tell them at home: eat up what's on your plate. So the whole family group was exceptionally happy with that intervention, and we had a really nice effect from it. Now here I will talk to technology, because I spent a good year trying to develop this into an app, because I was so embarrassed how unsophisticated this was. And I can tell you with certainty, I'm not a technology expert, so I'm happy to be corrected, but we actually had a functioning app. But it was so much more complicated to implement this with an app than it is to implement it with just a waiter who is assigned to the table in this case and gives a stamp. Because there's all sorts of issues with how do you check they actually ate up? Do you take pictures? What if they then just take an empty plate and take a picture of the empty plate? So there was just so many practical issues with the fancy app solution that actually, I must say in hindsight, if I were to advise a hotel, I would say, you know what, just go with the grubby piece of paper, because it minimizes all sorts of complications in this instance. But I'm not the expert. I'm sure there could be a much finer app developed that would solve all those problems. All right, what's next? Oh, that's actually the first study ever published in Annals of Tourism Research, Empirical Insights. And it's a very lovely, simple experiment. Again, not my experiment. And now we're moving actually temporarily from the tourist, we're moving to the kitchen, and we're looking at staff. And again, food waste in the kitchen is a big deal, right? Because there's preparation, there's chopping, and all of this goes in the bin. So here the researchers made a very simple infrastructure change. They replaced big intransparent bins with smaller transparent bins, see-through bins, plastic bins. And check this out, 73% reduction in kitchen preparation food waste. I mean, that's just absolutely remarkable, right? If this generalizes across locations, this is just the cheapest possible way to save a huge amount of money and make a huge environmental difference. Now, why is this happening? Well, there's two mechanisms the researchers identified. One mechanism is that the people in the kitchen are too lazy to empty the bins, right? So if the bin is small, you would have to go out and empty it multiple times. And that's pretty annoying. So you just try to not throw so much away so you don't have to run out as often. And the second mechanism they identified is that the chef, because it's transparent, the chef can see what's in the bin. So the chef looks at the bin and goes, well, why is there half a tomato in there? Why don't you take 3 more slices of that tomato? Yeah. So tells the staff to waste less of the food and put more on people's tables. So absolutely fantastically simple experiment. Really the kind of research I think we need more of, because it leads to immediate practical recommendations for industry that has the potential to really make an impact, material impact, on the sustainability of our tourism industry. All right. Oh, I have no idea how we could do that. With technology, but I'm sure in the conversation someone will give me a good idea. All right. I'm not quite finished yet, because now we need to talk methodology still. But first, I want to just say that all of these things, in my opinion, are a genuine win-win situation. So if we introduce these kinds of things, we are reducing environmental damage caused by the tourism industry, which is a massive win. We reduce operating costs. I didn't give you dollar values. Not all the experiments came with an explanation of dollar values, but you can imagine, right? If you are going to save 73% of the food and it's going to end up in people's meals instead of in the bin, you can just imagine the amount of savings you can have by making these tiny little infrastructure changes. Green positioning, I think that's a huge argument. I have a marketing background, right? So for me, it's all about positioning. So if a destination would have the courage to say, we just do not do daily room cleaning, we just do it on demand, we just don't use thick cotton serviettes, we just do all these things, tourists would actually see that destinations or hotels are really serious, and they're not just preaching, and they're not just putting little signs all over the place telling you what to do. So I think the potential here for green positioning is huge. And most importantly, there is no reduction in vacation enjoyment. So none of these things have ever meant a sacrifice on the side of the tourist, right? And that's actually usually what we do. We say, why don't you use that wet towel again and again for the environment? Well, that's not a very attractive selling proposition, is it? Well, that's not what we're doing. We're never asking for sacrifice. In fact, we would have seen many of the experiments have increased the enjoyment of the tourists involved in those interventions. Now, how can we test some more approaches? So now I'm going a little bit more in the methodology space, but I think it's really, really important to talk about this because we are sometimes, not tourism in specific, but scientists, scholars, we tend to get stuck in our ways, and sometimes we need to rethink if those ways are still the best. So I really want to say very loudly here, all of the experiments are measuring actual behavior, and that really, really matters. Yeah. So we got used to measuring behavioral intention, but behavioral intention is not behavior. And I'll give you one example how this is not the same. And that's a study my PhD student Logi conducted in Iceland. And he conducted it with boats. He went to an area where a number of boats were docking, and they were taking tourists out to go whale watching. And they were all pretty much the same, right? There was hardly a difference between them. Maybe the color was different, I don't know. And the ticket offices were right next to one another. So what Logi did is, after the people bought the ticket for one of the boat tours, they sat down and waited for boarding. So that was a good time to chat with them and survey them. So he asked them a whole bunch of questions. Among others, he asked them, did you consider the environment when you decided whether to book boat A or book boat B? And and sorry, I forgot to tell you, they are identical, the two boats, but one of the two boats is eco-certified and the other one is not eco-certified, right? So we asked them in the survey, have you considered the environmental impact of the boat tour when you decided between the alternative offers? And 60% say, yes, absolutely, we consider the environment. Now, that's great news, right? If that's the truth, then we go to boat provider A and we say to boat provider A, you've got to get yourself certified real quick, right? Because you're missing out on a lot of demand here because you're not eco-certified. Well, that's what people tell us, right? What did Logie do? Logie hopped on the boat with the tourists when the boats departed, and once he had them trapped on the boat, he asked one additional question. He asked them, is your boat, the one you're now standing on, eco-certified or is it not? And that was the only possible reason they could have considered the environment, right? And now we're suddenly down to 14%. And even those 14%, I would say there's one or two lucky guesses in that. And this is just one example, right? There's plenty of evidence across all social sciences that people do not do what they tell us they do, especially when we're studying socially desirable behaviors, right? So nowadays, it's just not socially acceptable to say that you're not behaving environmentally friendly. So if I'm going to ask you in a survey, you're always going to tell me you're behaving environmentally friendly. But will you really? Well, I would argue you will not. So that's why when we do this kind of experiments, it's really, really important that our dependent variable is an actual objectively measured behavior and not a stated behavioral intention, because we will get it seriously wrong if we rely on intentions. The second thing, and here technology comes in big time, absolutely big time, right? Because all those objective measurements, how much water you're using, how much electricity you're using, how much plate waste you're generating, that is not fun to do manually, right? So here is where technology comes in to measure objective dependent variables of human behavior. And then the second thing we need to do is we need to run more experiments. Now, why do we need to run experiments? Because only experiments allow us to draw causal conclusions. So this is the structure of an experiment. You see the first bubble is the starting point. The other bubble at the end is the end point. And then we have the bubble in the middle, and we can do something or not do something, right? So that's our intervention. So for example, at the beginning, we weigh the grams of plate waste. And at the end, we weigh. And in the middle, we change to smaller plates. So plate waste before, we measure the plate waste after with smaller plates or with bigger plates, or with smaller plates or with bigger plates. And because we control the intervention, we can say with certainty that the change in plate has caused, not is associated, has actually caused a change in plate waste. So these are experiments. They allow to draw conclusions about cause and effect. What does not permit conclusions about cause and effect is a survey study, a one-off cross-sectional survey study, right? Don't get me wrong. You can run an experiment that's happening in a survey environment. That's a different conversation. But usually what we tend to do is we will have a one-off cross-sectional study where we ask people different things, like we might ask them guest satisfaction, loyalty, behavioral intention, right? And then we say, oh, satisfied tourists have a higher intention to return. But do they really? How do we know that the arrow goes this way and not this way? I could equally argue if my behavioral intention is to come to the same hotel for the rest of my life, well then in all likelihood, my psychology will force me to give good satisfaction ratings, right? So one-off cross-sectional surveys do not allow these cause and effect conclusions. Now, I'm not saying surveys are bad. There's a lot of instances where we need surveys urgently, even in experiments. So for all the experiments I talked to you today about, you would have noticed I told you guest satisfaction didn't change. Well, I know that because we conducted a survey, right? But the main experimental design from which we draw the causal conclusions is an experiment and not a one-off cross-sectional study. So survey studies allow us to make statements about associations and correlations, but not about cause and effect. All right, and now where can technology play a role? And I'm going to stick to this little framework we've just introduced about experiments. And I really see, not being a technology expert, I see two areas where technology can play a major, major role. One is technology as intervention or as communication channel for the intervention. So as we talked through the experiments today, I told you a few times, wouldn't it be great if people walk into the dining room, and there's a friendly message, maybe with a joke, so it's not so offensive, that says, oh, why don't you, we gave you some recycled paper serviettes, but if you want a cotton serviette, go and get it. Or you walk into the, I don't know, you could go different areas, right? And in different areas, you could give them different little fun reminders about what to do. So that could be the intervention in its own right, or it could be the communication channel for the intervention, where we just alert them to something happening, or we tell them to use their phone to communicate whether they want the room cleaned or not. The more obvious role of technology is in the accurate measurement of the dependent variable, right? And that's where, for example, the water measurement comes into play. That's where the plate waste measurement comes into play. I cannot tell you how much money I have spent paying research assistants who are standing and manually measuring plate waste. It is absolutely crazy. It's super expensive. It's totally unviable, right? So what we really need, and we now are close to having this, is everything automated. A scale that is commercial grade, that can get wet and dirty, with automatic transmission of data every minute, where we can see the bin gets fuller and fuller, then someone empties it, then it gets fuller and fuller, and transmitting it all to us on a continuous basis, so that when we put the intervention in, we just have a continuous flow of plate waste data that we can experiment with. And we can then have a whole series of experiments, right? Because suddenly the dependent measurement, the measurement of the dependent variable is no longer expensive and complicated and tedious. And in fact, it's much more accurate than doing it manually. And electricity is the same, right? So same thing. We can just have electricity meters, and that can be continuously transferred. And then we can have some kind of intervention that we hope will reduce electricity use. For example, air conditioner, right? Air conditioner in the room is the major issue in terms of electricity, and minibars. Everything else really you can't influence, but air cons and minibars are the big deal in hotel rooms. All right, now I promised Claudia it's going to be 40 minutes, and I am spot on. I'm quite proud of myself. I'm at 39:23, so that's all I'm going to tell you today. And I'm very grateful for your attention, and I would be very happy to take some questions if we have time. Or learn from you some ideas how we might be able to integrate technology in this kind of research.
Sara, thank you very much for this inspiring speech. So you said before we started, you are a jukebox. You are great. It was so easy to follow you. You had a lot of really good examples, and there are some questions. So at 11:80, I think it refers to the beginning of your speech. Cecilia Bartaloni asked, did they try to use pre-selected option, for example, by asking guests to put the signal if they wanted the room cleaned every day? So it was referring to the example of you put a sign out when you want to have the room cleaned. And she asked, did they try to use pre-selected options?
So I'm not sure what you mean by pre-selected options, but I think the answer is no. So it was a day-to-day proposition, right? So we didn't say to them at the time of booking that they need to commit. But we on a day-to-day basis, they made the decision. Do I want my room cleaned today, or do I not want it cleaned today? And of course, the pre-selection is a very good idea. And we are working on that as well, because here's our little theory about that. We think that when they're at home, when they're booking, they're not in that really hedonic space yet, right? Yeah. But once they come on vacation, it's all about fun, right? Nothing about the environment. But when I'm still at home, I'm still my good, environmentally sustainable self, right? So if you could make me commit while I'm at home, that's probably a really, really good trick. We didn't do that here, because here it was the same model. There was no individualized model for the whole stay, right? So because you need to also implement these things. So basically, the cleaner needs a rule. The cleaner needs a rule what to do. So the cleaner rolls down the corridor and just sees, I'm cleaning this, I'm not cleaning this, I'm cleaning this. So it was a one day-to-day proposition. Another good reason for the day-to-day model is, think about the business tourists, it could have worked. But for the other hotel, it's mainly families. So Now, if you have kids, you know that some days you need the room cleaned, right? And you need new towels. There's just no negotiating because everything's full of sand. So actually forcing them to commit over the whole period would, I think, be too painful, right? What we did is day to day. So that gives them a lot more of a sense of control and freedom on a daily basis, that their needs are actually met.
Oh. There's the next question. We have a lot of questions. Jacques Bouchard says, this is interesting. Would also be interesting to know what happens in the long run once the experiment phase is over. Yeah, what happens if many hotels in the region adopt a certain policy for a long time? So have you ever came back to your experiment hotels and asked what happened after the experiment? Did they go ahead with the strategies, or yeah?
Oh, that's one question. I have 10 different answers. Because it's a brilliant question. So I will limit myself to 2 answers. One is, I'm absolutely shocked. I'm shocked by some of the hotel management. You can prove to them with objective data and facts that there's a solution that is better for the environment, that is cheaper for the hotel, and that doesn't bother the guests, and they will still not implement it. Now, I'm not talking about all hotels, right? But I can tell you that some hotels just are they're immune to scientific facts, and that frustrates me. So I think another whole line of investigation is leadership, which is, again, not my expertise. What's going on with the leadership? So I can prove something, and leadership resistance prevents it from being adopted. So that's one part of the answer. The other answer is long-term, no. I don't know what would happen if there would be a long-term cultural change. But the answer I will give is, I had a very funny experience. I talked to the government here in Queensland, and I was briefed. So in our university, we have someone who is the policy expert, right? So I'm known to say what I think. But these people didn't like what I wanted to say. So they told me, Sara, you can't say that. I wanted to say, if you have the courage, you have the power to actually say, in Queensland, it is prohibited to clean the room by default. It has to be a guest request. Now imagine if the government would have the courage to do that. Immediately, all of Queensland is positioned green. Immediately, every hotel has the optimal excuse to save money, because all they need to say is, we would love to clean your room daily, but my government prohibits it, right? So to me, it was the logic anyway. Our advisor said, Sara, you can't possibly say that. So I didn't say it. And then the minister comes and talks to me later. And I quietly said, well, if I would be you, that's what I would do. Well, guess what? She studied environmental law. And she said, oh, you're so right. Wouldn't it be great to do that? So I would love to see a destination, have the courage, and answer your question by actually implementing it on destination level and implementing it for a year. My prediction is it would be a huge success. Mm-hmm. The tourists would appreciate it. It would actually not be greenwash, but real green action. Mm-hmm. The hotels would first be in shock, but would very quickly realize that they're saving a lot of money and that they are not to blame. They can always push the blame on the government. So, I would just love to find a destination.
Really good idea. Maybe you can start with small islands. Talking to small islands first. Maybe it's easier than a huge country. But also, I think there is a development in the huge hotel chains, like Accor, for example, or the huge chains. And there is a restrictive from, let's say, the head office to all the different hotels. And according to my knowledge, they are really looking for sustainability and equality in all their hotels. But let's go ahead. There are some other questions really interesting from Julan Yuhan. Hopefully I pronounced the name right. What would be a motive to trigger tourists or industries to implement this great technology? Yeah, I think we talked.
But I can give a very quick answer. Cash, right? All interventions you saw today save the hotel money. And the moment you go to a hotel and you say, I'm going to save you money, their ears start flapping, right? It's all about money. You go to a hotel and you say, do something for the planet, they run. You go to a hotel, you say, I can save you money and increase your profit. They will do anything, right?
Yeah.
But yes, so really that's the hook. It's the fact that they can save cost. No, I'm being cynical. It's not true. Most of the hotels we work with, especially some of the Slovenian hotels where we did experiments, they're genuinely trying to, I mean, one of them is called Eco Hotel, right? So they're genuinely trying. But if you wanted to roll it out on a large scale to every hotel on the planet, it's all about cost saving if you want to make it happen.
Yes. What I also like is the question from Dimitrios Bouhalis. He puts the culture factor in. He says about the buffet and the waste of food. He says, is culture a factor? Some cultures tend to fill their plate much more than others. This is also what I thought. If you have experiences in different culture contexts.
Absolutely. So we know from the first study, which was in Slovenia, there was a significant effect. For example, the most was produced by Russian guests. By far the least was the Austrians, followed by the Germans. So there's absolutely a culture effect. You can even sit in the dining room and you can watch the difference, right? Like you can watch the Austrian couple. They have like a little bit of coffee and a little croissant, and they dip it in and they eat it, and there's not a breadcrumb left at the end. Absolute huge difference. We also did a study where we compared Slovenia to China, which is quite an interesting comparison. But yeah, totally like deeply ingrained cultural differences. So I know nothing about the Chinese culture. So for me, that was particularly fascinating. And what happens there is basically at home, they don't waste food. They recook it, right? So they have everything on the table, but if it's not eaten, the next day it goes into a different dish. But when they go on holiday, they have almost a cultural understanding that you must be nice to yourself, right? So it's the classic license to sin. This is your special time. It is your obligation to treat yourself. And that, of course, environmentally is a disaster, right? Because then we have the massive overfilling of plates and all of these things. So absolutely, Dimitrios, it is an absolutely gigantic cultural effect in these behaviors. Yeah. And also, I think almost the second part I can hear Dimitrios asking me is, yes, the interventions would have to be different as well. Yeah. So you couldn't expect that the intervention would work equally in all cultural contexts.
Yeah. There's another question from Dimitrios about timing. He says, in my Club Med days, first 3 days, guests will fill up their plates. But by day 4, they could not eat anymore. So you may need a different strategy for different days of stay, ?
Yes, absolutely agreed. So the first day is the trying day, isn't it? I mean, that you don't even need to, I know that from my own life. I go to a buffet, the first day is like, you beauty, I'm going to check it all out, right? Well, the second day, I know what I like and what I don't like, so I just grab what I like. So I totally agree. First day is a disaster, and then pretty quickly it should taper off. And that's why, for example, you know, one thing I've never done yet, but I'm really keen to do is more tasting plates. Why is that so hard to implement? Because the biggest cost factor for hotels is staff time, right? So if I go to a hotel and I say, why don't you make little tasting plates for each food item? They say, well, yes, we know it works, but we can't pay people to make little tasting plates, right? So there's still a big field of research where we need creative ideas of how we can implement smart tasting options or But yes, agreed. The first day for a Club Med experience for you, it was multiple, but certainly the beginning of the stay when you're still exploring has very different plate waste consequences than the routine days once you're settled.
Okay, thanks. The next question is from Dani. Thank you very much for the presentation. It is very interesting to know those studies on changing guest behavior. not bothering them. I'm wondering what are the effective ways to convince those luxurious hotel managers to conduct those strategies to save energy, since luxurious hotels focus more on satisfying the guests who have paid high amount on the hotel stay. This is what I liked very much, that you always looked in your studies at the guest satisfaction in your experiments. And I think he's referring to that, what you said before, that it is so difficult to convince the managers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's, again, multiple aspects of this question. It's a very interesting question. So why, I already said why the managers are reluctant. They're particularly reluctant in high-end hotels because, in fact, that's a real story, right? The Soviet experiment was in a very nice hotel. And we proved to the director, who is very environmentally oriented, we proved to the director that it made no difference to people. And yet they didn't adopt it. They went back to the thick cotton serviettes. Because in their gut instinct, they think my guest expects it. I just cannot disappoint my guest, right? But otherwise, I don't know that I necessarily agree with your premise. I agree with your premise, and that's a general tourism thing, is I've paid for something, I want to milk it to the maximum, right? Like that's how we feel. So I've paid my, I don't know, 100 euros, and I'm going to eat as much as I possibly can, so I get 110 euros worth of food back, right?
Because I deserve it. As Louis said, right. Yeah, it's the best weeks of your year is the time when you are on holiday. Right. Yeah. And you have to, you deserve it, and you have to make the best out of it.
Yeah. So it's the deserving, and it's also, and that's another thing, Dimitrios, that came out in the Chinese study, is apparently in the Chinese culture, there's a lot of logic around value for money, right? So you've paid, and now you can extract the maximum value by eating a lot, by, you know, having the aircon running day and night, by showering for half an hour, I don't know, right? So this value of money. But the interesting thing, which I have not thought about until that question by Danny came along, is it really true that people in a luxury hotel have more of that sense or not? Because, you know, I think that sometimes it's actually the people in the cheapest hotels that have the most sense of entitlement. So I don't know. It's just a question. Maybe it's a research question, Danny, for you to investigate. But I'm not sure whether, you know, I'm sure the people at the luxury hotel have a certain standard, but whether they have that same sense of having to extract value out of it when money is not an issue for them, I'm not sure if that's the case. So that's an interesting question.
Very good
answer.
Very good idea to do research on that. So there's the last question from Valeria Minghetti. Great presentation, Sara. You said clients do not show any change in satisfaction. What about hotel staff with smaller bins and the application of these rules in the long run?
Again, very different answers. I don't know about the hotel staff because that was not my study, the one with the little bin. So we would have to ask the colleagues who published that. But I can certainly tell you, because we debriefed with hotel staff. And we always actually, whenever we do an experiment, we involve the hotel staff. We ask them afterwards, what were their observations? And I have to tell you that the sense we have is a real sense of pride and achievement and enjoyment on the side of the staff. Because imagine you're and some of these people have been in the dining room for 20 years. And every day they're throwing away kilos and kilos of beautiful food. So the sense we got from the staff was like they enjoyed it. They were really happy. They were proud that their hotel did it. They loved giving stamps to kids, right? That was my sense. We never had a sense of complaint, even, and I'm surprised that question didn't come up, because, of course, what I have to confess to you is if we reduce room cleaning by 70%, cleaners lose jobs, right? So you would expect immediately the cleaning department to be upset. But the boss of the cleaning department, she was so unbelievably excited when we reduced cleaning by 42%. She said, that's just unbelievable. So overwhelmingly, my experience, I'm not saying that's always true in all instances, but certainly in all the instances we went into the hotel and worked with a hotel, the staff was curious. They loved being involved in what we were doing. They loved debriefing with us, and they enjoyed. Maybe it's also a bit of fun in their lives, right? As opposed to the same old stuff all the time. I mean, you can think of them. The kids were negotiating for stamps. They would chase the waiters down to get the stamps. Apparently, if the parents decided to go outside of the hotel for dinner, the kids were devastated. So then they would come because they missed the stamp, right? Then they would come the next day and they would chase the waiter and they would show the bill from the outside restaurant and negotiate, So, my sense was that it actually enriched the staff's life. It didn't frustrate them. But yes, the little bins might frustrate them. So it probably depends on the nature of the intervention. Yeah.
Could be. Sara, so there are at the moment there's another question. Sorry. One more question from Bintang Handayani. Behave responsibly, but actually I feel pity of the workers who must clean my room when it's actually not dirty. Do you have this reason in your research findings? I think it's about the feeling of the hotel guests, if they feel not so good when people have to clean their rooms.
That's the first time I've heard that. But it's very, very interesting. And certainly, again, that's a whole line of inquiry that is waiting for some brilliant researcher to look into. There is a lot that we picked up, which is the interaction of guest and staff. Yeah. But what I've primarily found was more in the area of social norms. So people say, I was embarrassed that the restaurant person saw that I left food behind. Yeah. So it was more in the social norm space. So the embarrassment that the staff members saw a behavior that wasn't right. Less so, that you feel sorry that they have to do a job. That hasn't come up, but may well be. And if it's true, right? If your hypothesis is right, then that's potentially a beautiful intervention. If you can communicate, then the pain you're causing to the cleaner, well, maybe that could change behaviors, right? So
this could also be. So this leads me to a last thing. Have you heard about the fun theory?
Fun theory? No, but it sounds fun, Claudia.
This was what came up when you were talking. So about these small things in infrastructure could cause a change. The fun theory was a project from Volkswagen. I think it was in Sweden, and they did things like they tried if people have fun, if they change their behavior. For example, they made like a claviatur, like a piano on steps. So when you use the steps to the underground, then it makes tones. Or there was a bin, and when you put something in, it says, thank you. Yeah. Things like that. And the fun theory is also, I think it's 5, 6, 7 years ago when they started this project. The idea was, how can we change the behavior? And the answer was, if people have fun by not using the lift, but using the stairs, things like that.
So I think it's a variation on nudging, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's ultimately a nudging theory, but with the driver being fun. Yeah. So no, I'm all for it. I actually think that's brilliant. I think especially in tourism, because tourism is all about fun, right? If we can give people more fun, that's just perfect. That's the single best intervention we can develop.
So Sara, I would like to thank you very much that you gave us more than 1 hour of nearly night in Queensland. Thanks for all your insights. My last question also from the audience, do you share your presentation with us that we can upload it on our website? Is that possible?
Absolutely, no problem.
Thanks a lot, Sara, and hopefully see you again soon.
All right.